হ্যালো, আশা করি সবাই ভালো আছেন। As you may already know, আজকের সেশন is on the criminal justice system. But before we begin, আমি কথা বলতে চাই প্রথমত, if you have not subscribed yet to the channel, please do so immediately. ফারদিন আমাকে বলেছে, I will only let your shitty content on my platform if you can get me 10 new subscribers. So please help me out. আর না হলে ফারদিন আমার সিম ইনঅ্যাক্টিভ করে দিবে। দ্বিতীয়ত, if you have any questions about the content we are about to go through, feel free to contact me or just comment on the YouTube channel and I will try my best to get back to you as soon as possible. However, please comment within a reasonable period of time. আপনি যদি 2 বছর পরে কমেন্ট করেন আমি কিন্তু রেসপন্ড করব না। তৃতীয়ত, if you see any factual errors whatsoever, please make sure to never mention it. Now that we've cleared the ground rules, let's begin. What the hell is the criminal justice system? Again, a long definition, but essentially, criminal justice system is the delivery or is essentially a system that tries to ensure the enforcement of laws. ঠিক আছে? So laws already আছে. They are there to make sure people follow the laws. And when people break the laws, what to do with them? That is essentially the jurisdiction of criminal justice system. Now, what constitutes a crime? Obviously, breaking the law is a crime, but there are two components to a crime that we should keep in mind before we move any further. First of all, the actus reus, which is the act itself, and secondly, mens rea, which is the intent. So, ekhanei ekta debate ache. There are a lot of people who think that the consequence of the act should not matter. Je it should be your intent alone that should determine how much you deserve to be punished. So ekhane there's a fairly intuitive argument to make for people who believe that only intent should matter in the delivery of punishment. Achha, to get this conceptually clear, let's analyze the situation. Let's explain through an example. হ্যাঁ, ধরেন আমি জেলাস হয়ে গেলাম যে সাজিদ কেন এতগুলো ডিবেট অ্যাচিভমেন্ট করলো। সো আমি একটা বন্দুক নিয়ে I shoot Sajid in the head, but the shot does not fire, it draws a blank and Sajid survives. Scenario 1 done. Scenario 2 similarly, Sorodipo অনেক জেলাস হয়ে গেল কেন মিকা এতগুলো এশিয়ান বেস্ট স্পিকার অ্যাওয়ার্ড পাইলো। সো Sorodipo বন্দুক নিয়ে গুলি করলো, but he is more successful and the shot does fire. এখন under current law, Sorodip would be punished significantly higher than me, even though our intention was the same. Essentially, we both had the same motive, we both committed যে হ্যাঁ আমরা এইভাবে মার্ডার করার চেষ্টা করব, but he was more successful either because of luck or because I am incompetent. But under current law, as a result of that, he will be punished more. Now, the people who argue that only intent should matter in the punishment would say the following argument, which is that we are both the same level of, we have both shown the same level of moral corruption or the same level of evilness, right? So when the outcome is not up to us, it is either a matter of efficiency or a matter of luck, none of which contribute to how much I deserve to be punished as a person. And that's why it should not differ. Now, if you are to make this argument, and if you do find yourself making this argument, I would also encourage to follow this argument with a framing. What is the framing? The framing is to explain why is it that the metric of punishment should always be only how much someone deserves to be punished. So here you can explain, Jay, look, imprisoning someone, for example, is a massive inhibition on a human being's universally accepted, inherent, and basic right to freedom. That is a huge responsibility for us when we say someone does not deserve to have that. And if we are to do so, we must ensure that this person goes through the days without freedom for exactly the amount of time they deserve. Not a day less, not a day more. So that's the framing behind the argument as to why the punishment should only be based on moral culpability, or i.e. how much this person is morally corrupt. The intent, essentially. Now, how do you oppose this? What if you are supporting the status quo, where both the intent and the act is taken into consideration, act being the consequences? So there are two categories of cases that you can go through. I mean, you should have both, but there are two lines of attack. Firstly is to say, Jay, based on the outcome, you deserve more punishment. So to accept the proposition's framing and to say, Jay, now, even based on the outcome, you deserve more punishment. Or B, to say, Jay, the punishment should consider more than just what you deserve. That there are many other factors at play here. So for the first category, which is that the outcome changes how much you deserve to be punished, we will discuss briefly now. For the second category, which is that we should take into consideration other factors beyond how much you just merely deserve to be punished, we will talk about that later when we talk about pillars of the criminal justice system. So just to briefly discuss how you may be able to argue that outcome itself changes how much you deserve to be punished. You may argue that the reason you are being punished is because you need to atone for the injury or the harm you have caused on society. And while we accept that the consequence may change based on luck, may change based on how efficient you are in carrying out your actions, but if you need to atone for more harm caused to society, more harm caused to a victim, if you need to atone more, then you deserve to be punished more. It's as simple as that. So punishment is about atonement for you. So that's why you deserve to be punished more, even though there's an element of luck or efficiency to the matter. Okay. I hope those arguments were clear. These kinds of motions do come out from time to time. One of the more classic ones, for example, is a situation where they say, drunk driving and involuntary manslaughter, for example. So a situation where someone is drunk and then drives and then gets back home safely, versus a situation where someone is drunk, gets into his car or their car, and then ends up running over, let's say, a homeless person sleeping on the streets, like Salman Khan did. And so the argument is, the motion will be about whether or not these two incidents deserve the same punishment. So there are lots of variations of these concepts at play based on the motions. Okay, now that we understand what is a crime, what constitutes a crime, and what is the criminal justice system, let's look at the components of the criminal justice system. So there are three components that we will be talking about today. Firstly, law enforcement, so police, etc. Secondly, court system. We will understand a little bit about how courts work. And thirdly, prison systems. So we will probably, in ascending order, I will spend more time, the least amount of time with law enforcement and most amount of time with prison systems. But before we go on, I would like to say a few things. Firstly, if you notice, as previously stated, the components of the criminal justice system are all about enforcing the law and doing and the processes that deal with situation where enforcement fails. Nothing to do with creation of the laws. So, but it is important to keep in mind that how these laws are created, or like the laws that are created, that are being enforced, may not always be fair and may not be and is only reflective of the norms of that current society at that point in time. It is rigged with privilege. How the criminal justice system is even created in the first place. At the very basic level, it begins with to what species you are born into. If you are born a dog who has managed to befriend the species that makes most of the that writes the laws, you are already luckier than most other animals. Just think about how much it reeks of privilege based on human centrism, based on socio-economic factors. When I point out these examples, it is perfectly legal to slit the throat of a living being and watch it suffocate and bleed to death. But it is illegal if you, as a human being, try to physically stop that act from occurring. It is perfectly legal for us to live alone in a 4-bedroom apartment while not giving a crap about the homeless child on the street, even though we have the means to. It is perfectly legal to forgot something. It's perfectly legal to do that to the child, but it's absolutely illegal for that child to even steal 10 taka from us, right? It's perfectly legal for corporations, medical corporations, for example, to make insulin so expensive that people die because they can't afford to get that medication. But it is illegal for us, for anyone, to try to steal an insulin shot so that someone they love may not die. These are just few brief examples of how messed up our systems of laws are, based on how messed up our systems of morality are in the first place. So, keeping that in mind and how privileged that is, also remember that the application of the law also then reflects that privilege to a large extent. How so? So, the likelihood of you getting caught would differ based on could differ based on your privilege. If, for example, people like you and me want to take drugs, we can, smoke it or snort it in our homes in private, in our bedrooms where our parents can't see, or where nobody can see. But if a child who is significantly poorer or a teenager wants to do it, they probably won't be able to do it at home because their home is so small, the parents will catch them. They'll probably end up doing it in public, like at a construction site or something like that, where the likelihood of getting caught is significantly higher. And that is one of the big reasons why the vast majority as one of the contributing factors to why a lot of the people caught by law enforcement are people who are poor. It is not just socioeconomic reasons that makes people commit crimes. It's also the fact that the laws are already stacked against them and the enforcement of those laws are stacked against them. Okay, so let's talk about law enforcement. We'll essentially just talk about police brutality and the militarization of the police. Okay, as you may have already guessed, police brutality occurs, obviously, and it primarily occurs against the underprivileged. So minority হইলে পুলিশের বাড়ি খাওয়ার chances অনেক বেশি. Poor হইলে, we see this in Bangladesh all the time. We don't really have we're a relatively homogeneous society. Vast majority of people are from the same race, but you know the likelihood of you getting hit by a police, you're being facing police brutality is significantly lower than a rickshawala facing police brutality. This is rigged with class privilege and but also racial biases in other countries where it's a bit more multicultural. Now, I think before I move further, I will obviously explain look, a lot of these examples that I will provide as we go on is going to be about America. There are a couple of reasons for that. Number one, I think, is because America is a very messed up prison system and a criminal justice system, and therefore it's a very big problem. And things that are a very big problem tend to be debated about a lot because people tend to try to come up with solutions. It is the worst system amongst all the developed countries, that's for sure. Secondly, when you are debating in English against, you end up debating against people of different countries, it's very hard to find things in common or examples that people all over the world can relate to. And as a result of America's global presence and the popularity of their pop culture, America is a very, like a common theme that everyone understands and can discuss in a context that everyone can relate to. So that's why we primarily discuss about the United States a lot. Okay, so police brutalization. As I was saying, the police brutality happens a lot more because of racial biases, because of class privilege on the poor and minorities, and often and most often those two seem to overlap. A few things to remember about this is the following. Firstly, there have been many experiments that have been done that put people in situations where they're shooting, for example, and like in shooting games and whatever, and to see the likelihood of them accidentally killing a black civilian or like a like a white civilian in the same situation. And everyone tends to have a bias against black civilians, and this is just not true of the majority race. This is even true of other people belonging to minority communities. So racial biases have permeated through these privilege gaps, right? So it's not just the privileged who have biases against the underprivileged. Underprivileged people have also been taught to hate and to distrust their fellow underprivileged people. The second thing, specifically when we're talking about police brutality, is it is exacerbated by the culture that exists in law enforcement agencies. So when you join the police force, for example, and you go through a lot of trainings, they will teach you obviously on the America obviously has like a lot more guns with police forces than like some other countries where it's not so common for police officers to carry guns. But secondly, the trainings they go through are also ones that encourage them to shoot first, to be preemptive, and to think later, because that is the pre-existing culture that has been there, and this cycle has continued, and it has not been broken, right? Because the same people who learn about this culture from beforehand are then teaching it to their juniors. So that's a culture that already exists. So police officers are trained regularly. Shoot first, shoot first, shoot first. They are not trained in being averse to or trained to shoot only in desperate situations. So that's one of the big problems that exists. So there's a natural bias and there's a training bias as well that exists. Secondly, it also has to do with the reason why a lot of police brutality occurs also has to do with the lack of accountability of the police or the law enforcement agencies. So why is there a lack of accountability with law enforcement agencies? Firstly, there's a culture of no snitching, right? So police officers are comrades, they're friends, and they don't snitch on each other. So a fellow officer sees someone take the shot or whatever, like, you know, so ওর জন্য বানায় বানায় কথা বলবে. They will try to back each other up. Secondly, and probably very problematically, is the fact that when criminal cases do like, you know, there's a possibility of a case happening, you have to keep in mind that the person who brings the case against a police officer in a criminal court is the public prosecutor. Why is this important? This is important because the public prosecutor is someone who brings cases against criminals and relies on the police force to provide them with the evidence they need to successfully prosecute criminals. So what happens? If they prosecute a member of the police force who they need to do their jobs, the police stop cooperating with them. That is a very real threat for public prosecutors. So what they do, they often drop the charges. They don't even bring it to court. They don't even file charges. Or even if they do, it's probably not with the best public prosecutors in the force. So that's the issue. The second issue with the lack of accountability here is also the public sentiment that goes to it, right? So the guy who goes to police officers, so even though there's a lot of problems with the police, and because primarily a lot of these attacks are against minority communities, the majority feel as if the police are great soldiers, heroes, you know, everything. So they often have an outcry when police officers are being prosecuted. So there's little public will, there's a little political will to change infrastructure. But it also affects infrastructure or culturally to change things. But it also affects how the court process works, because in America they have a jury system, right? So juries come from the public, randomly chosen citizens, who typically, because of numbers of statistical probability, many of whom tend to be from the majority community and therefore are unlikely to find this person guilty. Right. So what can we do, and what are people doing about it? If you don't know, I think one of the biggest sparks of the Black Lives Matter movement, which highlights a lot of this to life, began in Ferguson, right, with the killing of Michael Brown. We've since then highlighted lots of cases of police brutality against black, primarily men, the likes of Eric Garner, likes of Tamir Rice. We've seen these examples of highlighting police brutality to try to bring some form of accountability to the police force. So that's what people are doing. But of course, this is not meant to say that the Black Lives Matter movement only began with what happened in Ferguson. It has been going on since a long time ago, 80s or something. There was a song that came up that said "fuck the police," right? Like, it's a rap song. It's an iconic song, and these are real sentiments held by minority communities in many countries. People massively distrust the police. Now, what are the consequences of this distrust of the police? This has very real consequences. So when a black person, for example, hears something suspicious happening in their neighbor's house, they're scared to call the police. Because why? Because they're scared. What if the police kills them because they're black? The distrust of the police often means within the black community, they don't call the police on each other because they're scared of a disproportionate response of violence by the police. Often, this means a lot of crime goes unreported. Issues of domestic violence, for example, that neighbors know about, don't go reported because people hate the police. In very extreme situations in some countries, people have even resorted to having systems of justice opened up by gangs or cartels because of their distrust of the police, right? And that's a huge problem. Police distrust by minority communities in particular, right? I think even in Bangladesh, if you think about it, people don't really trust the police. Bashay dakate hoile, like, the first thing you people look at is like, koto taka dakate hoise. Like, is it worth going to the police and giving them the bribe in the first place? Anyway, so that's law enforcement. Now let's move on to court systems. Civil law versus criminal law. Ekhane first let's discuss what is civil law and what is criminal law, what is the differences. Civil courts is where people go to usually to talk about private differences. So for example, tenant bharatia or landlord of the ganjam lagse, so they go to civil court. Othoba let's say there is a like an employer-employee dispute, they go to civil court. So that's the number one difference. So what type of, usually the type of things people go to civil courts are personal differences, whereas criminal law is about crimes against society. We'll come to it in a bit, right? Like, okay. So second is about who files these claims, right? Who files the court case. So when it comes to civil court, the person filing the case is the aggrieved party, i.e. the person who feels wronged. So আমি একটা ভাড়াটিয়া, আমার like, you know, I'm leaving this house and then like they don't pay me back my security fund. আমি তখন কোর্টে গেলাম to file a case. This is an instance of a civil court. If you are talking about criminal courts, it is not about the victim. It is not the aggrieved party that files the case. It is the public prosecutor. Remember, we're discussing in the police, in the law enforcement slide. So it's the public prosecutor who brings the court. So it's not, because the crime is considered beyond just the personal crime. It is the crime is considered to be important to the bigger and greater society as a whole. So you know, assaults, rapes, murders, like, you know, even theft. All of these kinds of crimes are considered not just crimes against a person, a specific person, but against society as a whole. So that's why the public prosecutor is the one who brings the case. The public prosecutor is someone who is appointed by the government. Thirdly, in terms of punishment, civil law, civil courts, the punishment is usually much less. It's usually like a financial penalty or decision in this land dispute, the land will go to this person or that person. Erukom. Criminal law, it could be jail time if the crime is severe enough. The fourth difference is burden of proof. Again, burden of proof must be a very common terminology for debaters, but essentially, in a criminal court, as we all know, the burden of proof is to prove beyond reasonable doubt. If you want to say, like, find someone guilty, you have to prove beyond reasonable doubt. That is a very high burden. Now, what is the case in civil law? Civil law, you don't have to prove beyond reasonable doubt, because it is a case between two people. It is about beyond balance of probabilities. Beyond balance of probabilities. What does that mean? It means if the judge finds 51% likelihood that this person is correct, then it will vote in favor of this person, and the verdict will be in favor of this person and against that person. So just based on balance of probabilities, beyond balance of probability, I think this is more probable than the other, and therefore I do this. Ekhane one thing to keep in mind is if you realize, I'm sure many of you already know, bringing the argument of victims and victims' justice in most criminal justice debates don't usually work. It's because the criminal justice system, the criminal system, is about a lot more than the victim, and a victim is a very small component of the determinants of a punishment for someone. However, the additional factor is because criminal courts are not made for the victim. If you want damages to be paid to you for personal injuries, you go to civil court. That is where victims are the ones who are, like, that is where victims get their justice, right? So that's why, so it is, I should clarify, even criminal cases can be brought to a civil court. right? So I think many of you will know like O.J. Simpson, a very famous case. He was found not guilty in a criminal court, but then in civil court when someone brought the charges against him, তখন কিন্তু ওখানে he was found guilty. I think Kobe Bryant as well. In criminal court, charges were dropped, but the cases proceeded in the civil court. Eventually, he made a settlement on his rape case. So that's the distinction. Now, both of these courts have a very similar pyramid in terms of where you go if you're not satisfied with your decision. So if you are found guilty, for example, you can try to appeal that decision. So you go, so these are the trial courts. So you go to the court of appeals and you say, please, I want to appeal. They will look at your case and দেখবে যে কোনো valid reason আছে কিনা তোমার appeal করা। ওরা যদি তোমার কোনো একটা valid reason পায়, then they will say যে okay, you মানে ঠিক আছে, fine, we will have to reconsider your case, and then you go back and then you have another case. So you manage to have another court hearing, but sometimes they will just throw it up. Above that court is the Supreme Court. So as you go up, final court is the Supreme Court. A Supreme Court is the final say on the law of the land. So this again is also both for civil courts and for criminal courts, and they're the ones who will have final say. So there rarely are instances where, like most cases obviously don't go to Supreme Courts. Supreme Court, I think one thing to remember is, well, firstly is Supreme Court judges, how are they selected? That is very important. So in America it is probably very problematic. These judges are selected for life. So unless they die or unless they're so ill that they voluntarily say আমি আর পারতেছি না, they will sit there without any accountability. How are they selected? The rule is they're selected directly by the American president and to be confirmed by the Senate. If you realize, that means it gets very political. If you are conservative, if you are a judge with a lot of history of making a lot of conservative decisions, you are likely to be picked by the Republican president. If you have a history of making a lot of liberal decisions, you are likely to be picked by the liberal, like the Democratic president. ঠিক আছে? So এখানে অনেক পলিটিক্যাল খেলা আছে। The second thing যে আচ্ছা, so এখানে যেমন currently United States Supreme Court has a 5-4-6-3 conservative majority. এখন এখানে আর কি মানুষজনের complaints আর কি যে what happens when Trump gets re-elected again and he gets to pick, probably because one of the judges, Ginsburg, I think, is very old, but she's liberal and she's trying to hold on and trying not to give up her seat, trying not to die and trying not to give up based on her illness, because she's hoping probably for a Democratic president to show up so that she can leave and a liberal judge can replace her. That's very important. Why is this important? It's important because if you think of some of the historic cases the Supreme Court has made, right? So the Supreme Court makes decisions that says basically this is the interpretation of the Constitution or the law. They don't make laws, but they interpret the Constitution, right? So Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court said that based on the Constitution, actually abortion should be legal. So এটা একটা Supreme Court decision through America, it was legalized, which Republicans have been fighting ever since and trying to come up with sneaky like ways of trying to make abortion harder for people. Another example is relatively recently gay marriage was legalized in the United States, not by any policy, but the Supreme Court itself going to based on the Constitution written whenever, actually marriage between the people of the same sex or gender, whatever it is, should be legal. So it's a Supreme Court decision. So you can imagine the importance of the Supreme Court to the country. Okay. Now, let's talk about the unequal treatment of minorities and the poor in courts. So, in terms of the unequal treatment of minorities, okay, এখানে first of all, the court system is stacked against minorities and the poor. How so? প্রথমত, in terms of access to lawyers. If you are rich, you have the ability to get yourself a really expensive lawyer. Typically speaking, lawyers who are expensive tend to be also very good at their jobs. So you get to have the best defenses if you are rich. If you are poor, you don't. You have to get some kind of a pro bono lawyer, like someone who is working for free, like state provided, or court, like company charity case, whatever it is. You are stuck with very shitty lawyers. That's the first problem, and that's one of the biggest problems as to why a lot of poor people get screwed over in these courts, like get convictions over crimes that they did not commit, or end up pleading. They confess to crimes that they never actually committed because they're scared that if they don't, they will serve longer time in prison once they're proven guilty by the opposition's better lawyer. Second way in which they're screwed is the human biases, right? So এখানে একটা debate আছে between juries and judges, right? So America, in criminal courts, often they employ juries to decide whether or not the person is guilty or not guilty. Please note that the jury does not determine the sentence. The sentence is always decided by the judge. The jury can sometimes come in to decide guilty versus not guilty. Obviously, there are human biases on both sides. What are the problems with juries? The problems with juries is because they are randomly selected. They typically are from the majority community, which obviously has a racial bias, but even you may argue people from even minority communities have a racial bias against fellow people of minority communities or the underprivileged in terms of class privilege, right? So it can also be, for example, the problem that the juries are not trained to let go of those very biases, right? So they hold on to those biases a bit stronger. They're not very experienced in this situation. They just bring their whole life personal biases into the frame. There's also the problem of groupthink, where in juries often what happens is it's one or two very influential people within the jury who end up being able to control the discussion that occurs in the jury in the first place. So the group does not really have 12 independent people coming to the same conclusion, but rather the conclusion of one or two people gets to be what the group decides. So that advantage doesn't come in. And of course, the other thing is the jury just comes in, gives their decision, leaves. There is zero accountability on juries. They can say whatever they want, there will be no repercussions, they will go back. Even people years later, when they say, oh, this didn't, this court or that case or this case was not correctly adjudicated, nothing will happen to them. It will just be a statistic, or this many percentage of African Americans suffer, right? Okay, so what is the issue with judges? Of course, you can say there's an, what do you call it? The issue with, you can say, they have to maintain, they're trained and like all the opposite things of juries, and there's an accountability. However, this accountability can be problematic because they might feel like they need to be more conservative in their decisions to get selected to certain positions that they want to get. Or sometimes in America, some of the judges are elected into some of the higher courts as well. So এখানেও একটা motive আছে যে sometimes they will be like, what if I come off with the tag that I am tough on crime? So if I come off with this credentials, I'm more likely to get voted in which case they're more likely to be not so nice towards minorities who are typically the defendants. There's also the issue, what do you call it? Like they have their own biases and everything, but also like I guess you can argue otherwise, because they have their record and they don't want a lot of appeals against them, so there is some kind of accountability at least. মানে আমি যদি একটা কোর্ট কেসে ডিসিশন দেই বাট বারবার যাই ডিসিশন দেই না কেন মানুষ এপিল করে ওভারটার্ন করে ফেলে, দ্যাট রিফ্লেক্টস ব্যাডলি অন মি, সো at least there is some level of bias there, but of course some level of accountability there. But of course you have to keep in mind that compared to juries who are randomly selected, maybe a judge is even more likely to be from the majority community, because it is such a position of privilege and difficult to get into that situation. There's so many barriers to entry. You have to be highly educated. In America especially, to get a law degree, first you must get another degree and then only you can do a law degree. People who are from poor communities cannot afford that kind of a double degree education to begin with, right? So that bias may actually be higher when it comes to judges. So now there is a debate happening about what do you call it, what to do when it comes to sentencing, because judges obviously are the ones who are sentencing. I guess I should clarify it is not always, it is not predetermined. It is not like তুমি চুরি করলে 3 বছর, তুমি মার্ডার করলে 10 বছর. There is no such specific rule. It is almost always a spectrum. Theft's punishment can range from 6 months to 5 years, for example. Murder can be, first degree murder can be 8 years to life imprisonment. So it's usually a spectrum, and within that spectrum judges get to make their decision. এখন এখানে there is a case to be made for what do you call it, case to be made for algorithms to come in to make the decisions on sentencing. Now ekhane people are saying, on the one hand, why not have algorithms make these decisions based on data, and that will be better than judges who have human biases. Now there are two things, is that first of all, for people who argue for algorithm will say, it is obviously not a white person. Secondly, we can control the elements that the algorithm will take into consideration, so it will not have racial biases. However, here's the thing. You can only control with AIs the first level of input you are giving to the algorithm. After that, the algorithm continues to learn by itself, right? So it makes better decisions by taking in more and more information, and makes better decisions and learns from different data sets. And the problem is that the records and the data sets are already racist. So it is learning from a racist data set, and it may even double down on the racism if it feels that it's an effective strategy. So that's something to be careful about when thinking about algorithms. Okay. Finally, the fourth way in which court systems screw over poor people. It's about the concept of cash bail. Because the progressive movement is fighting hard against cash bail. What is cash bail? Cash bail is essentially the concept when I get arrested, আমি bail payment করব. So এখানে আমি যাব, আমাকে বলবে যে তুমি 10,000 টাকা দিলে তোমার জেলে থাকতে হবে না. So আমি 10,000 টাকা দিলে আমি চলে যাব. Why is this the case? The thinking goes যেহেতু আমি 10,000 টাকা বন্ড দিয়ে বের হইছি, so I will make sure not to miss my court date. আমি পলাতক হব না, আমি ফেরত আসবো কোর্টে. That's the thinking. Now, what are progressives saying? Progressives are saying to abolish cash pay and just let an algorithm decide whether or not this person should be let go or not. If the algorithm decides they should be let go, they should not be charged any bail whatsoever. So you might be asking, why would this person come and not disappear? So এখানে অনেকগুলো argument আছে. Firstly, I think if you can already intuitively realize that the bail is obviously discriminatory towards the poor. এখন এখানে কয়েকটা জিনিস আছে. First of all, it it has been found out the biggest, like, it is unlikely that people will try to escape. Why? Because people live in their own communities. Where are they going to escape? They want to come back and live with their families. Even if they have to go to jail, they eventually want to be with their family. People don't really have a lot of places they can run to. Most people don't have the money to run to anywhere. And they wouldn't want to in the first place. The vast majority of reasons, by the way, people miss their court dates is because either they did not have money for transport to get to the court, or they could not afford childcare. So they could not afford the money required to give their children to someone else while they went to the court and face their verdict or face their judgment. Those are the two big reasons why people miss court days. The third being people just forget. I'm assuming those are small and petty cases, right? So if that is the case, why does cash bail make this situation much worse? It makes it much worse because, firstly, if this person is poor, they're unlikely to be able to obviously like pay bail and therefore get stuck. However, in the event that they're able to pay that bail, what does this mean? This means that if a poor person is squeezed to pay a bail, it makes it even more likely they will miss their court date because they won't have the money to travel, because they won't be able to manufacture more money for someone else to take care of their child while they go to the court. এখন এখানে কিন্তু আরেকটা ব্যাপার আছে, because people are so desperate not to go to jail, obviously they're bail bondsmen, people whose special business is essentially giving loans to people who need money for bail at a very high interest rate. That is another exploitative practice that exists around cash bail. So the progressive movement right now is fighting very hard, tooth and nail, to get rid of cash bail, and it is already happening to a certain extent, to small situations. Some countries have, some states, I think such as California, are moving towards abolishing cash bail or concept of cash bail for petty crimes altogether, or holding people in. So I guess the argument against would be about the algorithm that replaces the system. So you might be able to argue, maybe depending on the motion, the algorithm that will decide whether or not you stay in jail or go free will be an algorithm that ultimately puts more minorities in jail anyway. And so maybe right now it is really bad. A lot of people are struggling financially to make this payment to go out on bail. But if you replace it with the algorithm, what will happen is much worse. The algorithm will end up putting a lot of these people who may have been able to somehow pay the money to get out, which they need to do, actually সবাইকে জেলে ভরে দেবে. So that's an argument that some people are thinking of. Depending on the motion, you may or may not be able to argue this. Okay, cool. So that's the court system. এখন finally on sentencing. Let's say you come to the courts, তোমার decision হয়ে গেছে, তোমাকে jury guilty পাইছে. Now comes the sentencing. Remember we talked about a spectrum, right? You may face, let's say, for the same crime of theft, like it may be anywhere between 6 months to 5 years, for example. Now how does a judge decide whether it will be on a higher spectrum or a lower spectrum, apart from the biases, obviously? So এখানে multiple factors. Aggravating factors হচ্ছে factors which make it more likely you will get a higher punishment. Mitigating factors are factors that a judge considers as a reason to lower your punishment. So এখানে aggravating factors আমরা একটা লিস্ট দেখি, তারপর mitigating factor দেখব. Aggravating factor, repeat offenses. This is obvious. আমি যদি 3-4 বার ডিফারেন্ট ক্রাইমসের জন্য আমি বারবার কোর্টে যেতে থাকি, জাজ ফেড আপ হয়ে আমাকে বেশি বেশি পানিশমেন্ট দিবে. ভালনারেবিলিটি অফ দ্য ভিকটিম, দিস ইজ ইম্পর্টেন্ট টু রিয়েলাইজ, ঠিক আছে? তো আমার ভিকটিম যদি এক্সট্রা ভালনারেবল হয়, দ্য চান্সেস আর দিস ইজ অ্যান অ্যাগ্রিভেটিং ফ্যাক্টর। আমি একটা বাচ্চার এগেনস্টে কিছু করি, দিস ইজ আ ভালনারেবল ভিকটিম। আমি যদি একটা স্কিম বানাই, ঠিক আছে, যে মানুষকে ট্রিক করে, আই টেক দেয়ার ক্রেডিট কার্ড ডিটেলস অ্যান্ড আই whatever I steal money from them, it matters whether or not I'm doing this against an average person, or I'm specially targeting people who are super old and more vulnerable to me. So আমি যদি ল্যাটারটা করি, তাহলে it's an aggravating factor because I'm taking advantage of people who are especially vulnerable. Thirdly is leadership role. So a group of people commit a robbery, the leader is likely to get more punishment because the level of culpability presumably increases because you are the one who orchestrated the whole thing. Fourthly, hate crime. So difference between just assaulting someone, let's say I assaulted someone because আমার ওর সাথে মারামারি লাগছে, whatever, versus I assaulted someone because I'm racist. হ্যাঁ, যে ও কালো, আমি ওকে এর জন্য অ্যাটাক করছি, that's a hate crime. A hate crime, because it's a hate crime, even though the effect is the same, এটা একটা aggravating factor, so এর জন্য আমি বেশি পানিশমেন্ট খাবো. সো দ্যাটস ওয়াই এখানের মধ্যে কিন্তু অনেক ডিবেট হচ্ছে এলজিবিটি আস্তে আস্তে দে ওয়ান্টেড টু বি কনসিডার্ড a hate crime. What about religious motivated assaults and stuff? Is that considered a hate crime? এটা নিয়ে অনেক politics হয়. So next is circumstances of the offense. So circumstances of the offense being যে at the time of the event, what are the circumstances at play? ঠিক আছে, সো এখন যদি circumstances of the offense এরকম হয় যে what do you call it, let's say the victim was, I don't know, trying to think of an example. Circumstances of the offense meaning যে হ্যাঁ, let's say যে আমি অনেক ঠান্ডা মাথায় অনেক একটা কোনো, let's say there is no excuse, not an excuse, but there is no reason for my committing an action at that particular point in time. যে হ্যাঁ, আমি জাস্ট কোনো কারণ নাই, I am not, you know, anything, I am perfectly like fine, I am doing financially well, whatever, everything, আমি ওখানে গেলাম, আমি জাস্ট দেখলাম যে একজন টাকা ফালাইলো, আমি তো চুরি টাকা, ওয়ালেটে অনেক টাকা, আমি ওকে মার্ক করে ফেললাম, ঠিক আছে. সো দ্য সার্কামস্টেন্স অফ দ্য ক্রাইম ইজ দ্যাট আই ডিড নট হ্যাভ আ স্পেশাল রিজন or special circumstance that would, like, you know, explain my actions, even though not excuses, but I don't even have an explanation. So that circumstance would mean যে it is an aggravating factor. Okay, mandatory minimum sentencing, this is something that is out of the judge's hands. So sometimes the government can make a law that says যে যদি একটা মানুষ এক্স ক্রাইম করে থাকে অথবা এক্স ক্রাইমের জন্য 3 বার কট হয়ে থাকে, they will face a minimum sentence of 5 years or something, ঠিক আছে. সো an example of this is the drug war in the United States. যখন ওরা বলছে যে হ্যাঁ, তুমি উইড রিলেটেড কোনো ক্রাইম করলেও তুমি যে 3 বার ধরা খাও, you have to face at least 5 years in prison. So imagine you can be caught smoking weed 3 times. হ্যাঁ, and again think about this, you're thinking, oh stupid, 3 বার ধরা গেছে উইড নিয়ে, but the difference is, you know, poor people cannot hide in their homes sometimes. So 3 বার ধরা খাইছে, 5 বছর জেল just for smoking pot. Finally, lack of remorse. So if I'm doing something and I'm not showing any remorse whatsoever, so it's cold-blooded, it's extra, what do you call it, like evil আর কি. হ্যাঁ, সো যখন একটা উইটনেস এসে টেস্টিমনি দেয় যে হ্যাঁ আমি দেখছি ও যখন মানে ইয়েটে করছে, যে অ্যাসল্ট করছে, এক্সট্রা রুথলেস ছিল, ও কোনো লাইক কোনো মায়াই নাই ওর, ঠিক আছে. সো তখন দ্যাটস আ ল্যাক অফ রিমোর্স. সো তখন জাজ বলবে ঠিক আছে, তোমার আর একটু বেশি পানিশমেন্ট খাওয়া উচিত. মিটিগেটিং ফ্যাক্টর এক্সাক্ট অপোজিট. সো ল্যাক অফ আ প্রায়ার ক্রিমিনাল রেকর্ড. আমি যদি কোনো ফার্স্ট টাইম ক্রাইম হয়ে থাকে তখন জাজ এটা কনসিডার করে, আচ্ছা বাবা ফার্স্ট টাইম মাত্র মিস্টেক করছো, তোমাকে একটু ইজি দেয়. হ্যাঁ, সেকেন্ড হচ্ছে কালপেবিলিটি অফ দ্য ভিকটিম. কালপেবিলিটি অফ দ্য ভিকটিম মানে কি, ভিকটিমের তো দোষ থাকতে পারে, ভিকটিমের যদি দোষ থাকে তখন এটা একটু কনসিডারেশন থাকা হয়. যেমন আই গেস এক্সাম্পল উড বি মেবি আ রবার কেম টু মাই হাউস, ঠিক আছে, তারপর আমি ওকে গুলি মারছি. হ্যাঁ, সো ইটস ভিকটিমের একটু দোষ আছে হালকা পাতলা হইলেও. সো এখানে একটা কালপেবিলিটি অফ দ্য ভিকটিম ক্যান বি এ মিটিগেটিং ফ্যাক্টর. 3 হচ্ছে মাইনর রোল ইন দ্য অফেন্স. সো আমি একটা পার্ট অফ আ গ্রুপ অফ রবার্স হু ডিড সাম ক্রাইম, বাট আমি আসলে অর্কেস্ট্রেটর না, আমি একটা বিট পার্ট প্লেয়ার, আমি একটা পন. হ্যাঁ, সো তখন আমার জন্য একটু এটা মিটিগেটিং ফ্যাক্টর. ফোর্থ, পাস্ট সার্কামস্টান্সেস. সো এখানে বিকজ অফ মাই পাস্ট মেবি দ্যাট এক্সপ্লেইনস ইভেন দো নট এক্সকিউজেস মাই actions. So for example, maybe I was abused growing up and that led to a situation where I become abusive myself. So এরকম একটা past circumstance consider করা যায় as a mitigating factor. Next, circumstances at time of offense. Circumstances at time of offense being J, maybe someone provoked me, maybe at that point I was having a mental breakdown. So these are all circumstances at time of offense that might be mitigating factors. Next, mental or physical illness. So আমি যদি generally mentally or physically ill থাকি, তখন জাজ একটু কনসিডার করে বেচারা সাফার করতেছে, আমি ওকে একটু মিটিগেট করে দিই, ঠিক আছে? ইটস নট অ্যাবাউট দ্য টাইম অফ অফেন্স হিয়ার, ইট ইজ ইন জেনারেল যে আমার একটা ডিজিজ আছে বা হোয়াট এভার, সো জাজ একটু কনসিডার করে পানিশমেন্ট একটু লেস দেয়। ফাইনালি জেনুইন রিমোর্স, লাইক যখন দেখে যে আসলেও দিস পারসন রিয়েলি অলরেডি রিগ্রেটস হোয়াট দে হ্যাভ ডান, হ্যাঁ, সো তখন এটা একটু দেয়, তখন এটা একটু রিডিউস করে দেয়। Four pillars of the criminal justice system. এখন, before we dive into these four things, firstly, I would say that if you have come through so far, maybe take a break and then come back. Take a 5-minute break, come back. Unfortunately, I don't have that luxury. Sajid bolche amar ekta video te sob kichu pathaite hobe. Anyway, so I will say, just to remember and understand who does it apply to. It applies to people of age of criminal responsibility. Now, what is the age of criminal responsibility? Age of criminal responsibility is when you are held accountable for your actions. In most countries, it tends to be around the age of 11, 12, 13. If you commit a crime as a child, as a 6-year-old, you have no accountability whatsoever. তোমার কোনো punishment নাই. If, as an adolescent, you, what do you call it, like as a 12, 13-year-old, you commit a crime and you go to the juvenile system, ঠিক আছে? So you go to juvenile courts send you to juvenile rehabilitation centers. Those are significantly more focused on rehabilitating you than punishing you. And additionally, they're more likely to consider a lot of things. Like, for example, they may be more willing to expunge your record, right? Expunging means যে officially তোমার রেকর্ডে এটা থাকবে না যে you committed a crime. So এটা যদি হয় তাইলে it's more likely you will not be stigmatized in society. Okay, and then you have adult courts. So we'll primarily be talking about adult courts, but it's not that different. It's just juvenile systems are basically a bit nicer, a bit more rehabilitation. Take a sec. Okay, so very quickly, 4 parts of the criminal justice system I think we should all understand. First, and if you do understand this, I think you will be able to debate any sort of prisoner-related debates very easily. Okay. So, firstly, incapacitation. Incapacitation is essentially about restricting someone's ability to commit crimes in order to ensure the immediate safety of society. That is it. Retribution is punishment. We've been talking about this for so long. It is essentially, you have done the crime, now it is time for you to do the time, serve your time. So thirdly, rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is trying to get you, criminal, to be someone who can go back into society and function again and not commit crimes again. This is one of the biggest challenges of criminal justice system right now. America, 70 to 80% of criminals who are in prison, who get released, go back to prison within the first 1 or 2 years. Finally is deterrence. It's the concept I need to prevent other people from also committing the same action, or like prevent other people from breaking the law, or anyone really. So just to quickly understand, I think this is fairly obvious. American prison systems suck. They are a lot more punitive. এবং Scandinavian prison systems are much more amazing. They're a lot more rehabilitative. So they have lower numbers of people who are in prison. They have less jail time. The prison systems are significantly more humane, অনেক spacious, অনেক কিছুই আছে. I don't know if you remember the case of Omar Breivik, right? The Oslo attacker, who was a right-wing activist, sorry, alt-right, whatever it is, right-wing terrorist, who killed a lot of people because he was immigration policies of Norway being so open to Muslims and foreigners. So he actually managed to file a case against the Norwegian government for not giving him good enough prison facilities, and won. The court said yes, he should be given better facilities. Anyway, so right, so these systems are so humane, in fact, in Scandinavian countries, is that they sometimes even have a fixed rooms, right? So what are fixed rooms is that if you're a drug addict, for example, who is in prison, what they do is they will allow you to have small dosages of those drugs to make sure, you don't have extreme withdrawal symptoms. So to help you rehabilitate from those drug addictions as well. So it's a very humane system based on this. Of course, one thing to point out is that perhaps it is also true that the recidivism rate in these kinds of systems may be far lower, not just because the system is better, but because once these people get out, the welfare system is also significantly better and captures them, as opposed to societies such as America, where socioeconomic protection is very low for these people. So recidivism is also very high. Okay. So let's talk about these factors. Firstly, is imprisonment the only way to ensure immediate safety of society? Okay, so the reason is essentially, I have this slide, is to talk about the different ways in which you can incapacitate people, right? So it is not necessary যে মানুষকে জেলেই ভরতে হবে to incapacitate them. There are various methods that incapacitate people to various degrees. The most obvious you may have thought about is having house arrest. That is a solution that people can have to incapacitating people. Say you are dangerous to society, but I will not put you in prison, I put you in house arrest. There have been motions that are like, this house would abolish prisons. So a motion হইলে তোমার alternative দিতে হবে. Please don't say যে আমি সবাইকে ছেড়ে দিব. So you have to say, okay, fine, maybe house arrest দিব. There are other systems. So for example, on parole যখন ইয়েরা বের হয়, so they have to perhaps regularly talk to their in-charge officers to let them know where they are. Some people have to report, some people have restrictions on which city they cannot leave. So they have to go to the police precinct, some of them on a regular basis, to report. You have electronic tagging of people, so to collect an electronic tag lagai there, so then they know where this person is all the time. That is also a level of incapacitation, because obviously you can't really commit a crime without getting caught in that situation. But of course that itself has its own problems, right? Because there's a lot of stigma. I mean, একটু জুতা খুললা ঠিক আছে, মানুষ দেখতেছে ও আচ্ছা ক্রিমিনাল, এটাকে আমি কেন চাকরি দেব। সো আরও অনেক ইনোভেটিভ জিনিসপত্র আছে, ঠিক আছে। সো ইউকেতে দের ইজ এ সিস্টেম যে after if you are closer to getting release date, so they start slowly habituating you to society. What they do is যে দিনের বেলা তোমাকে ছেড়ে দিবে, you go to your job, and then around 5 p.m. or by 6 p.m. whatever it is, you go back to prison. So that is like slowly aste aste chhatese instead of ekbar chhede daw. So there are many different methodologies, different types of incapacitation. Imprisonment is not the only way to ensure the immediate safety of society, but of course it is the most harsh, it is the harshest way, and may sometimes be necessary based on the level of threat that a person poses. Deterrence. এখন এখানে একটা কোয়েশ্চেন আছে যে a lot of people ask যে is deterrence a very effective way, or does deterrence work basically? Now the first thing to understand about deterrence is, of course it works if the comparison is going to be যে তুমি মার্ডার করলে you live in a free society, তোমাকে কিছু করবে না, versus তোমাকে পানিশমেন্ট করবো, প্রিজনে দেবো. Of course that deterrence works. No consequence at all, versus huge consequence on me will obviously work to change my decision making. However, that's not where most of these decisions get taken, right? Most of these decisions are যে আমি কি আরেকটু সিভিয়ার করব নাকি পানিশমেন্টটাকে, লাইফ ইমপ্রিজনমেন্ট আছে ক্যাপিটাল পানিশমেন্ট দিয়ে দিব নাকি। সো দোজ আর ওয়্যার মোস্ট অফ দিস ডিসিশনস কাম, মোস্ট অফ দিস কোয়েশ্চেন্স কাম ইন। মানুষ বলে যে হায়ার পানিশমেন্ট দাও কেন, তাইলে ডেটারেন্স হবে, বাট অ্যাকচুয়ালি this is not very accurate. Why does deterrence not work? Plenty of reasons. First of all, what you must understand, two of the most basic I think things that everyone knows is that firstly a lot of crimes are committed as crimes of passion. What is crimes of passion? As in crimes that are committed in the heat of the moment, i.e. for example a lot of domestic abuse probably is an example of crimes of passion. That these are not premeditated, these are emotional crimes, i.e. this person is not actually considering the consequences of their actions. They're in a fit of rage, for example, a fit of vengeance, whatever it is, that these are crimes that people don't really consider the consequences. So having a higher punishment won't actually stop them from committing these crimes. Second, there are instances, the other types of crimes are crimes that are premeditated. Premeditated criminals are unlikely to think that they're going to be caught. People are because these people are carefully planning their actions and therefore think they will get away with it. Therefore, changing their prison system sentence from 5 years to 10 years will not meaningfully deter them. Thirdly, is also the very realistic argument যে আসলে most people don't even know what the punishment is. আমি যদি তোমাকে জিজ্ঞেস করি যে বাংলাদেশে চুরি করলে পানিশমেন্ট কতটুকু, আমি যদি 5,000 টাকা চুরি করি আমাকে যদি পুলিশ ধরে পানিশমেন্ট কি বলতে পারবা? Most people will not be able to tell. So the reality is that most people don't even know. There's an ignorance of the details of the law among people, which is why higher punishments don't work either. Now, there is even a reverse consideration that some people may argue, which is that if you put the punishment too high, in fact, what essentially happens is not deterrence, but a lack of reporting. Because a lot of crimes occur in the house, right? People you somewhat may still care about to a certain extent. And this may reduce the amount of times people report a crime. Now think of sexual assaults, for example, which are mostly done by family members, etc. If someone's uncle committed a crime against them, the higher the punishment, the higher might be the likelihood that the victim's own parents discourages them from reporting against this, right? This is an argument that people may make. So that's that. However, what if you are on the side that has to argue deterrence? I think the way deterrence works, for deterrence to work, it has to be a huge jump from a relatively small punishment to such a huge punishment. So from going from like 2 years to like 20 years punishment. So massive jump that it creates awareness. যে মানুষ জানে, oh my god, এটা করলে নাকি অনেক পানিশমেন্ট হয়ে যায়। So that kind of a radically different punishment will be enough to get through people's minds. Even a premeditated criminal will be like, but what if? But there's a problem here. The problem is that it goes against the concept of proportionality. I should be punished in proportion to the crime I have committed. So it should not exceed that concept. But you may still argue it in special circumstances. So one way of arguing for extraordinarily high punishment for the sake of deterrence in very specific situations could be if you're arguing for the change of culture. What am I looking at? So for example, one example could be that we are aggressively trying to change a very problematic and toxic culture that exists in a society. So it could be, for example, acid throwing, right? So acid throwing in Bangladesh, there was a huge spike in the punishment given as part of the awareness campaign by the government, and it did significantly reduce the amount of acid throwing. So fair, we agree that maybe the individual may not have deserved the extraordinary level of punishment thrown on them, or you can argue they deserved it, whatever it is. But it served a purpose. It served a purpose to make society safer and deter this kind of crime in the long run that was necessary, right? A more palatable example that might be universally understandable is like traffic laws, right? So you might be in a culture where people break the law tremendously and very continuously. So এখন আমি যদি একটা law বানাই যে there will be massive, disproportionately high penalties for someone crossing a red light. Red light যদি cross করে সাথে সাথে I don't know, like 50,000 টাকা ফাইন একটা রেড লাইট ক্রস করার জন্য, অথবা 1 লাখ টাকা ফাইন একটা রেড লাইট ক্রস করার জন্য। আমি যদি 1 লাখ টাকা ফাইন দিয়ে রেড লাইট ক্রস করার জন্য, is it disproportionate? 100%. There are social consequences to what will happen. A lot of people who are poor will end up falling into poverty. Like if people are poor but not under the poverty line yet, they might fall under that. People will be unable to pay, spend time in jail, and you will say, hey, there will be costs, but we need to change the culture. And in that specific situation, it may be required that we need to save lives, and people are losing lives because nobody follows the law, the traffic laws, and we need something radical to change it. So that might be a unique case for justification of a very high form of punishment to create deterrence in society. Okay. Next is rehabilitation. Now, the answer to this question in the slide is no. They're not successfully rehabilitating prisoners, at least in the vast majority of countries. Now, to think about rehabilitation, what I will do is I will tell you what are the 5 most successful components of rehabilitation programs to make sure people don't commit crimes again. And as I go through them, you should think about how much it would cost, because that would give a huge explanation as to why these rehabilitation efforts are not taken. Because as you may know, societies are not very fond of criminals. Societies are not very supportive of government spending a lot of money behind criminals. And that unfortunately often leads to a cycle of having criminals not being rehabilitated and having more criminals and more crimes in society. So what are these rehabilitative methods? First, and perhaps the most successful component of a good rehabilitation program, is to have education, which is essentially not education like educated on the law, education as in giving them the ability to educate themselves while they're in prison. So for example, going and pursuing degrees while in prison, going and getting certification programs, going like this training, that training. And this has been shown to be one of the most effective ways to rehabilitate people, because once they get that education level, they are now in a different market altogether and they can move up the socio-economic chain. But this has to be subsidized by the state. It's very difficult for people to be convinced that criminals deserve this. Second is employment, right? So things such as training to get them ready for the employment world beyond education. So giving them special skill sets. So for example, I don't know, teaching them carpentry, teaching them like specific skill sets they will be able to use, what it be anything, but essentially the employment related, or actually I don't know why I'm giving such low skill level examples. Like it could be like learning how to program, right? So these are all employment related skill sets that people could find useful. Okay. Thirdly, counseling. Now counseling can be a lot of ways, right? It can be academic counseling, it can be social counseling, it can be personal counseling, which is to do with mental health. It can also be vocational counseling. So vocational training, which I'm a counselor like that. Fourth, wellness and rehabilitation. So ekhane a lot of things just to take care of your mental health. So for example, yoga, tai chi, meditation classes, even dog training, culinary classes, gardening classes, এইসব জিনিসপত্র is for wellness of people. These are also things that help contribute to making sure these people are rehabilitated. Now imagine convincing taxpayers to pay money for prisoners to learn gardening or have culinary classes. That's very difficult. It even includes, of course, making sure that the correct nutrition is in the meals of every prisoners, of each prisoner, right? So these are all part of wellness programs that you would have to make sure for proper rehabilitation to take place. And finally is on community, right? What does community mean? It means finding a community that you feel a sense of belonging to. So this has to do with after people get out of prisons. So if they find a church group, if they find a social group, if they find a voluntary, some kind of volunteering group, whatever it is, a group that is a support system for them. Now, this I think is not that costly, but maybe some efforts need to be taken by prison systems to link these people with these groups. What is the benefit of this? The benefit is A, these people support them when they're in times of need, but B, it's a system for people to feel accountable. If I feel accountable to this group that I look up to, that I want to do something for them, that's a purpose. That's a sense of purpose for me, not to fall back into my old life. So that's a social belongingness, that really social belongingness component of rehabilitation that is really helpful. Okay, so that's with rehabilitation. Now let's talk about punishment. এখন, what is punishment or retribution? It is essentially the belief that you deserve to be punished for your actions. And we have talked about this to a certain extent, and one of the most important concepts of it is proportionality. It believes that you deserve to be punished to the same extent in proportion to the crime you have committed. Now, what are the reasons that we don't believe in punishment? This is the fairly common argument that progressives take, and this should be relatively easy for you to argue if you find yourself on this side. First of all, socio-economic conditions, I think fairly obvious, contribute to why someone commits a crime, and that is moral luck that someone is in a poor socio-economic situation versus someone else. By the way, I would just like to point out that every time I've noticed this trend, people give socio-economic reasons and then give an example of desperate জন্য bread চুরি করছে, but socio-economic reasons go far beyond the immediate desperate economic need. What does a socio-economic need mean? It means it goes beyond আমি drug peddle করছি because I need to provide enough for my family, though it also does mean that. But it is also beyond that. It is also, you could be not so poor, but you could come from a broken family. That's a social reason for why you might be someone who turned to a life of crime. You may have been abused. That's a social reason why you might have done something. A socio-economic factor is also that when you are brought up, let's say, in a neighborhood where it's relatively poor, maybe you don't have the immediate need যে আমার বাসা হয়তো খাওয়া আছে, but the difference is still যে I still live in a neighborhood যেখানে it is relatively easy to access guns. Some other rich brat lives in another neighborhood where it is not so easy to have access to this lifestyle. ওর আশেপাশে এতগুলা গ্যাং নাই, ঠিক আছে? ও যদি থাকতো, ও চাইতো গান কিনতে, ঠিক আছে, কারণ এটা অনেক কুল। কিন্তু আমি একটা পুয়ার নেইবারহুডে থেকে, there are so many gangs around me, আমিও ওদের মতো কুল হইতে চাই, এর জন্য আমি একটা গান নিলাম। In that situation, because of my socio-economic luck, I end up with a gun where the rich brat does not, and it ends up with me getting caught by the police at some point because I own an illegal gun, right? So these are socio-economic reasons. They're like, so it's a very like a very comprehensive umbrella under which a lot of crimes come in. Secondly, I think it is also important to remember is to attack the concept of free will in the first place, I suppose. How do we choose what we want to do. So we are free to, for example, choose to do what we want. But how do we want something in the first place, right? And that is based on our genes or just random algorithmic luck that we want certain things. Now, people supporting punishment say you may have urges that you cannot control, but you chose to act on those urges and therefore you deserve to be punished, where someone else may not act on those urges. But what this, and you may be able to get away with this response, by the way, in most debates you will, but what this response does not recognize is that that is still not dealing with the fact that I not responding to the urge means that I have another urge that tells me that I should try resisting that, and these are competing urges, and one ultimately was more powerful for me. But for someone else, that competing urge may not even arise because of how? Because of the genetic makeup, because of algorithmic luck, right? But also, it also has to do with brain composition, right? So different people are born with different chemical compositions in our brains. Some people innately have more ability to feel empathy, some have less. Some people have more ability to feel sadness, some have less. Some people have more ability to feel anger, some have less. We can't use a justice system to punish people when people face fundamentally different challenges in their life. And some people may not be able to be in control of those actions, right? You can't tell someone, why are you not empathetic, when they can't even have the same ability to feel empathy as you. And so that's something to consider as well. Now, don't think of this as like, oh, empathy feel korte pare na mane hocche o je sociopath, ঠিক আছে, বা psychopath, whichever it is. It's not that people exist in a spectrum. It's not just zero ability to feel empathy, but less. Some people have more, right? So people exist in a spectrum. Now, these are all reasons why you may believe that punishment is not deserved, because free will does not exist, etc., etc. But also, I think in addition, there's a philosophical reason why people argue that punishment is not something that should be considered. What is the philosophical argument? The philosophical argument goes as follows. I am today as a result of I am who I am today because of my lived experiences, because of my lived experiences today as a 28-year-old person. এখন, if I compare myself to what I was when I was 18 or 19 years old, I would say that I'm a fundamentally different person. And most of you will also be very different people today than you were 5 years ago, and you will be very different people to who you are today versus who you will be in 10 years' time. People change over time because their lived experiences change over time. Now, if my lived experiences necessarily change over time, and therefore I become a different person, then the argument goes that it is, you are not punishing the person who is culpable for the action in the first place. Because future me is suffering for today's me's actions, but future me is not the one who committed this crime. Because future me and today's me are different people altogether, because who I am is as a result of my lived experiences. Now, this argument is applicable and more applicable the longer the present term becomes. Opposition might correctly point out that even if you have different lived experiences, you still have a shared set of common lived experiences. So 30-year-old me and 20-year-old me still has 20 years worth of shared lived experiences. So you are not completely different, even if you are somewhat different. The second thing, therefore, is, but of course this response says that you are partially responsible, not fully responsible, right? So this is an acknowledgement that maybe punishment is deserved, but the longer the punishment becomes, the less of the original person you are punishing. And that's something you may want to keep in mind. Okay, I hope everyone got that philosophical justification. Now, what if you're on the side of punishment? That's difficult. you have tough luck. Hey, firstly, hopefully the motions are worded in such a way that you don't have to defend in general not rehabilitating people or in general punishing people, prioritizing punishment over rehabilitation, but rather specific or extreme situations. So firstly, I think one of the ways, however, principally you can defend punishment is to talk about the concept of proportionality. The concept of punishment is not just যে হ্যাঁ for blood আমি মানুষকে পানিশ করতেছি, but punishment is because it is a, what do you call it? It is A, an atonement, as we discussed before, but B, it is about the concept of proportionality, because punishment is what makes sure that you are only punished to the extent that you deserve to in proportion to the crime you committed and no more. Because what if the other factors of deterrence, for example, came in and said যে হ্যাঁ মানুষকে deter করার জন্য আমি huge amount of punishment দেব, তখন concept of punishment comes in and says no, it has to be proportion. So it is a balancing act. So that's one, I suppose, way of talking about punishment, though obviously the other team may be able to explain that the concept of rehabilitation, the concept of what do you call it, safety are enough to deter people from being punished too much, but also because they should only be rehabilitated if there's a need to be rehabilitated, right? Anyway, the second thing is, I would say that if you are stuck in a situation where you have to defend punishment, one of the sneaky ways is to be slightly less reliant on inherent logic and more on intuition pumps. So fool the judge into thinking you have an argument by using a lot of very convenient examples and pushing the other team to respond to those very specific examples, right? So, and again, hopefully the motion allows you to do it, and not like some crazy motion that asks you to support American justice system over Scandinavian prison system. So, for example, a situation might be, what if the motion says this house would never consider punishment as a component and you are supporting punishment? You could ask, for example, the question, what if, the situation of Milosevic, who is a war criminal, Serbian war criminal, who was a general, who helped in the butchering of 70,000 Bosnian Muslims. So he was caught when he's very old. Ekon, this obviously, this person, there's no need for rehabilitation in the first place. He's old, he's incapable, he's out of power. But গ্রামে গিয়ে লুকায় থাকতেছিল. What deterrence does it create? No deterrence. Deterrence এর কিছু নাই. No one is gonna be like, oh, মিলোসেভিচকে তো পানিশমেন্ট দেয় না, ও বুড়া, এর জন্য চলো আমি আজকে একটা জেনোসাইড করি, আমাকেও মনে হয় পানিশমেন্ট দিবে না. It doesn't work like that, right? Safety. He is not a threat to anyone. He's old. এখন tell me, do you think a 70-year-old, a 75-year-old Milosevic deserves to be sent to prison or not? A general who ordered the butchering of 70,000 Muslims in his country. Ethnic cleansing Chesters. So these are, what do you call it, like obviously situation. Obviously these are extreme examples, but again, usually motions that ask you to support punishment are typically not motions that are like ask you to support punishment in every situation whatsoever. So you might be able to use this tactic. Cool. Last concept that we will discuss now is the prison industrial complex. Now, supposedly the prison industrial complex started around the time of the war on drugs in the United States. The war on drugs was যে আমরা ড্রাগ কনসামশন বন্ধ করার জন্য আমরা হিউজভাবে ওরা নামছে, ঠিক আছে? সো এনি কাইন্ড অফ ড্রাগ কনসামশন মানুষকে ধুমসে জেলে পড়ছে. Then they ran out of capacity. Then they were like, okay, fine, we don't have capacity in our state prisons, let's pay some private companies to manage prisoners. So most people know the following. The way the private prisons work is the government pays a certain set of money to the prison, to the companies, to manage this prisoner. The longer they manage someone in their system, the more money they get paid. And this is something that everyone knows. And what is the problem with this is also very obvious. First of all, this means that they have an incentive to lobby the government, and they do lobby the government, to ensure that more things are considered crimes. So for example, হ্যাঁ ড্রাগ কনসামশনকে ক্রাইম ধরে, হ্যাঁ উইড খাইছে এটাকে ক্রাইম এটাকে একটা ক্রিমিনাল হিসাবে ধরা যায়, ঠিক আছে। সো এরকম জিনিসের জন্য ওরা লবি করে। সেকেন্ডলি, দে অলসো অ্যাডভোকেট ফর লঙ্গার পানিশমেন্ট, কারণ যত লম্বা টাইম সে প্রিজনে থাকবে তত আমি টাকা পাবো, because of I have to take care of them for a longer period of time. So these are two very easy and obvious examples. Thirdly, there is no incentive to rehabilitate. আমি একটা প্রাইভেট প্রিজন, আমার ইনসেন্টিভ হচ্ছে আরও বেশি প্রিজনার আসবে, আমি কেন তোমাকে রিহ্যাবিলিটেট করব? আমি খুশি হব তুমি যদি ফেরত যেয়ে আবার ক্রাইম করে তুমি আবার প্রিজনে ফেরত আসো। ইনফ্যাক্ট এইসব কোম্পানি, আই থিঙ্ক what are the company names, Civic, I think, Core Civic, right, that's the name. Core Civic is one of the companies, major company. So in their annual annual general meeting to their shareholders, they were talking about how rehabilitation does not work in their systems, and therefore shareholders should rest assured je ব্যাপার না, business is good. So that's what they do. So and as we previously discussed, rehabilitation is extraordinarily expensive. So why would they do that? Instead, they will cram prisoners into very small spaces in order to save costs, and at the same time it also helps that these conditions don't help with rehabilitation whatsoever. Putting people into shitty conditions is not going to help them learn a new life, learn a new skill, learn an education that will help them get back up when they leave. It's going to destroy them mentally, and when they leave they're going to fall back into the same patterns. So these are things that people know. Additionally, perhaps what we don't know is that some of us may not know is that they profit massively off of prison labor. Actually, it's not just them who profit massively off of prison labor, it is also the companies who employ them to profit off of this prison labor. So almost all of the military equipment, or such as helmets in the United States, are actually made by prisoners who get paid like something like $1 an hour or something, like money far below minimum wage. So this is under the guise jihad. This is like they're working to learn skills. So ekhana they're made to work, and so companies hire them. I'm not sure if you've seen, but there was videos at some point, viral videos of firefighters in a fire who were actually prisoners, and everyone was like ooh, clapping for them. But actually the reason they're there is because they're being forced to be there for $1 an hour or something like that. So it's very bad. But the prison industrial complex, and this is the point I wanted to make, actually goes beyond just private prisons. What do I mean by this? So first of all, এরা যে employed হয় while being prisoners, other companies also benefit. It's not just prison companies, right? So McDonald's, Wendy's, Walmart, Starbucks, Victoria's Secret, American Airlines, all of them employ convicts to do some part of their labor. So they profit off of prisoners being in prison. So they also have an active interest to make sure there are a lot of prisoners at any point in time in prison systems, and they also often lobby for higher punishments, more things being considered crimes in the United States. Secondly, there's a very interesting thing, which is that something that has backfired, which is a lot of companies are given tax breaks in exchange for employing ex-convicts. So you might think, oh, ex-convict ke employ korteche, that is good, it helps with rehabilitation, so ora abar jabe na. But instead what ends up happening is because the company gets a huge tax break from getting these ex-prisoners, that company has an incentive to make sure there is always a huge influx of ex-prisoners. So they also lobby for more and harsher punishments. Sorry, for more people to be sent to jail, sent to prison for minor crimes. And private prisons, by the way, are not exclusive to the United States. Many other countries at some point or the other have either considered or employed them. The United States, obviously, UK, Australia, France, Canada, all of them at some point or another, or even now, have private prisons. Okay. That's essentially the session. But before we finish, আমি দুটো জিনিস বলতে চাচ্ছিলাম। প্রথমত, if you like the content, if you like the video, please ভিডিওতে একটা লাইক দিবেন। আমি জানি আমি ইরশাদ ভাইয়ের ভিডিও থেকে বেশি লাইক পেতে পারবো না। হি ইজ আফটার অল দ্য বেস্ট লুকিং গাই অ্যারাউন্ড। সাদ আশরাফ যতই আগলি, ইরশাদ ভাই ততই গুড লুকিং, which means he is the best looking person in the Bangladesh debate circuit. দ্বিতীয়ত, আমি ইন্ট্রোডিউস করেছি যে there's a bit of controversy going around in the Bangladesh debate circuit, and I wanted to share my 2 cents. Worlds 2020 in Thailand, I judged with Sudipto. And in my experience, Sudipto is a very good adjudicator. But based on Austral's 2019 feedback, Miraz is not a very good judge. I felt it was very important to say. That is all. Stay home if possible. Stay safe. Keep sane.